So I've been using the M4 iPad Pro pretty much every single day for the past 6 months now. I've used this for a bunch of tasks ranging from creative work to admin work to revising for exams, as well as general leisure use. And it's got me thinking, where does the iPad go from here? So in this video, I wanted to share my experience using the M4 iPad Pro so far, along with how I've personally been using the iPad during my day-to-day life. One of the big changes to the iPad Pros this year was the introduction of that new OLED panel. Now, I'm not usually one to care too much about having the fanciest displays, but the M4 iPad Pro has definitely changed my mind on that. The screen is an absolute joy to look at. It offers much more contrast compared to previous LCD displays. That makes the process of consuming content and doing any sort of work much more enjoyable, which is obviously important because the screen is the part of the tablet that you're going to be interacting with the most. And it's actually changed the way that I use my iPad, because with the displays being able to reach up to 1000 nits of SDR brightness, I was able to take and use the iPad with me a lot outdoors this summer without having to worry about the sun blocking the screen. This was something that always used to stop me from working outdoors because my M1 iPad Pro could only reach 600 nits of brightness, and 600 just wasn't enough for me to comfortably see what was on my screen. I did also go for the standard glossy display over the nano texture option. I've personally not used a nano texture before, but having seen some of the reviews for it online, I am starting to question whether or not I should have picked that option, especially because the screen on the standard model does suffer from a lot of glare when exposed to the light. Another change we got to the iPad Pros this year was the thinner design, which I've actually been a big fan of. It might sound like a small difference because on paper the difference doesn't look that large, and I don't think any iPad Pro users were ever asking for a thinner iPad. But during day-to-day use, I have found that the M4 is a lot more comfortable to hold and carry around than my previous M1 model, and I can definitely notice the difference. It makes it feel like you're holding a sheet of glass. I'm sure that some people will be concerned about the durability of these new iPad Pros, and yes, I'm sure that if you tried really hard to bend it, you could probably snap it in two, but as long as you're not doing some crazy jiu-jitsu with your iPad, you're going to be fine. The only durability issue I have had is that the back of the device does pick up a lot of fingerprints, especially on the Space Black model, but in the grand scheme of things, this is a pretty minor point. Another small quality of life improvement has been the movement of the Face ID and front-facing cameras to the side of the iPad, which to be honest is something that should have been done years ago, but now it offers a much more natural viewing angle for when you're on video calls, and it fixes the annoying issue of your fingers covering the Face ID sensor, which was a big frustration with previous iPad models. There were also a lot of jokes about Apple removing the ultra-wide camera on the back, but after 6 months of use, I don't think it's something that most people will necessarily be missing. And when it comes to scanning documents, Apple did say in their keynote that the M4 iPad Pro is supposedly meant to be better when it comes to scanning documents, thanks to their AI technology, but I'll let you decide from these images if that's actually the case. I've specifically gone with the 11-inch model because I'm using the iPad as a companion to my MacBook instead of as a standalone computer, and I've not had any regrets. For me, 11 inches strikes the perfect balance between portability and versatility. It's extremely easy to go from laptop mode with the Magic Keyboard to tablet mode with the Smart Folio case, and it's super easy to take with me to work, where I'm also carrying around a separate Windows laptop.
I have a bunch of accessories that I've been using with my M4 iPad Pro, including the AX Ultra 2 stylus from EiP, who are also kindly sponsoring today's video. EiP make a bunch of premium accessories for the iPad, like their AX Ultra 2 pen, which is a much more affordable alternative to the Apple Pencil. It features a simple, minimal design with a customizable top button that can be mapped to different shortcuts, such as taking screenshots and switching between apps using the WellNote app, which is a free-to-download app from the App Store and offers a bunch more customization options, including the ability to set different double-tap gestures across your favorite note-taking apps, and enabling tracking support for the pencil. The stylus itself lasts for up to 10 hours on a single charge and has a G sensor that puts the pencil to sleep when it's not in use, and then wakes it up automatically upon lifting. And when paired with their nano paper-like screen protector, it offers a much more realistic handwriting experience with its paper-like texture. However, what impressed me the most is that the screen protector is actually removable, so you can continue to use the iPad screen like normal when you're not writing, and then reattach it when needed. EIP also make their slim tablet bag, which you can use to protect your iPad when traveling with it on the go. It's made from a waterproof and shockproof neoprene lining and features multiple compartments which you can use to store accessories.
I'll leave a link to all of the products that I've mentioned in the description below. Thank you to EIP for sponsoring this video. Another notable change with these M4 iPad Pros was the upgrades to the Magic Keyboard, with the switch to aluminium on the inside and the inclusion of the function row keys at the top, as well as the larger trackpad which now supports haptic feedback. And I'd argue that if you're upgrading to an M4 iPad Pro, this actually might be one of the biggest changes that you notice. I found that the new Magic Keyboard just has a much more solid and premium feeling compared to the previous one, and it's made the experience of using the iPad a lot more enjoyable. And despite the switch to aluminium, Apple somehow managed to make these keyboards slightly lighter. It's not a huge difference, but the slimmer footprint does make the device easier to carry around. Having said that, the back of the keyboard case is still made from the same soft rubber material as before, which is an absolute fingerprint magnet and will probably wear off over time. When it comes to the Apple Pencil, the upgrades haven't felt as noticeable. I personally haven't found myself making any use of the haptic feedback button. Funnily enough, the main feature I've actually been appreciating is the Apple Pencil hover support, which lets you preview what you're about to select with the pencil. It's meant that I don't have to worry as much about tapping on the wrong icons when browsing through the interface. Of course, this feature isn't exclusive to the M4 iPad Pros. It's actually available on the M2 iPad Pro and M2 iPad Air. And it's funny because I initially dismissed this feature when it first came out. I thought it was just a gimmick. But now, anytime I try and use an Apple Pencil on an iPad that doesn't have Apple Pencil hover support, it does feel quite strange. Now, I also wanted to quickly touch on how I personally use my iPad during my day-to-day life. I'm not one of those people that tries to use their iPad as their main computer. I've made an entire video explaining why I don't think that's a smart idea. But broadly speaking, I'd say that there are 3 areas where the iPad really aids my life. Those being leisure, studying, and creation. I like using the iPad a lot for watching TV shows and movies, browsing through Pinterest for inspiration, along with reading the news for when I'm sat at the couch. And the benefit of having that OLED display is that it allows for those deeper blacks and richer colours, which my previous M1 iPad Pro lacked. The iPad has also been a huge study companion for me. I've recently been studying for the certificate in corporate finance for my full-time job, and having access to apps like Notion and GoodNotes and Anki just makes the process of studying not only easier, but also a lot more enjoyable compared to using traditional pen and paper. Finally, I've also been using the iPad a lot for creative work and managing this YouTube channel. When it comes to emailing sponsors, scripting these videos, and editing photos for my Instagram page inside of Lightroom, I find that the iPad just gives me a slightly nicer experience compared to my Mac, especially on Lightroom, where the Apple Pencil gives you a bit more control over your adjustments compared to a traditional cursor. In fact, this came in really handy when I was designing my recent gradient blur wallpaper pack inside of Procreate, which you guys have seemed to absolutely love. For those of you that are interested, I'll leave a link to it in the description below. But yeah, I think this is one of the things that I really like about the iPad, which is just how easy and simple it is to use and pick up things. I feel like it almost lowers the barrier to entry for anyone looking to get any sort of creative work done. I studied economics at university, so I have no background in tools like Photoshop or Final Cut Pro or any of these other creative apps that you see people on YouTube talk about. And the idea that a beginner like me can pick up an iPad and learn to create something in Procreate is just a lot less intimidating than having to learn the complexities of Photoshop on the Mac, for example. Now, all of this has got me wondering, where does the iPad go from here? Because realistically, there's only so much you can do hardware-wise before you eventually hit what most people would call peak iPad. In fact, a lot of people would probably argue that the iPad Pros from 2018 were the peak iPads, because the design has remained mostly similar since then. Having said that, I do think that there are a few improvements that the iPads could do with going forward. The first thing being the battery. It still baffles me how in 2024, the highest end iPad still has the same 10-hour battery rating as the first iPad that was released back in 2011. We've basically gone an entire 13 years without any improvements to the battery. Now, of course, 10 hours is still a pretty decent rating. It's usually enough to last through just under a day of moderate use, But if you're using your iPad intensely, or you're trying to use it as your main computer, you can easily run out of juice within a couple of hours. And I feel like for a lot of people, the iPad is often used as a sort of travel computer. You might have a Mac Mini or an iMac that you keep on your desk at home. And then when it comes to going out, you can take your iPad with a Magic Keyboard. And I feel like those sorts of users would really benefit from a battery life improvement. From my own experience, there have been a number of times over the past 6 months where I wanted to take my iPad with me to a coffee shop to get some work done. But when I checked the battery, it only has like 40% remaining, which I know that without a charging plug won't be enough to get me through the entire journey. Granted, there are of course going to be limitations when it comes to fitting in a larger battery inside of such a thin device, but I am hoping that in future chip upgrades, Apple do prioritize efficiency gains over raw performance. Speaking of performance, the M4 chip is in theory supposed to be faster than the M1, but I honestly can't tell any difference during day-to-day use, and this shouldn't really come as a surprise to anyone anymore. Potentially, the M4 chip might be slightly better at processing some of Apple's on-device AI tasks, like generating responses for writing tools, and it might be a bit more future-proofed when it comes to receiving future AI features. But Apple Intelligence still is in beta, and the features available are quite limited right now, so I can't really speak to that. I have also noticed that iPadOS can be quite laggy at times. In particular, when I'm dragging out apps into split screen or in side view, there's often a couple of seconds of lag when it comes to loading apps, and it's been a recurring issue for me ever since iPadOS 16, which isn't something you'd expect on a flagship tablet. Of course, there are always other changes Apple could bring, like making the OLED displays brighter over time, and maybe even introducing some kind of always-on display, like we have with the iPhones, and reducing the thickness of those bezels. Also, at some point, it would be nice if Apple could find a way to increase the distance at which Face ID is able to read your face. I found that a lot of the time, when I'm using my iPad as a second screen on my desk, the iPad just struggles to read my face. So overall, I don't think that we're quite at peak iPad just yet. We've definitely peaked in terms of the experiences that the iPad can give you. Everything that my M4 model can do, so could my previous M1 model. It's just that the M4 does all of those things slightly nicer. And so whilst it's not the default recommendation I'd give to somebody looking to buy a tablet, if you are looking for the best or the most premium tablet out there, then the M4 iPad Pro is definitely one to consider. And if you're unsure on whether an iPad can effectively replace your MacBook, then I have a video discussing that topic, which you can click above here. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Make sure to follow me on Instagram and Twitter, and subscribe for the next one.